Now let's take a look at how we would do it without exceptions. This is going to require a bean. Let's take a look at the status bean first of all. This is a bean. It's got the default constructor which sets the properties to some default values. So data OK is assumed to be false and message is going to be the empty string. We'll provide a method for accessing each of those. Is data OK will return the current value of data OK, and get message will return the current value of message. We also need to provide a set data OK and set message, so a standard Java bean. Now in the servlets, the controller is going to have a slightly different approach. It's going to dispatch to the model as before. So let's take a look at what the model does. So it's going to get the parameter. It's going to do the same stuff as before, parse it, and if a number format exception is thrown, this time it's going to set its local variable ageOK to false and its local message variable to the age is not an integer. So it's exactly the same message, essentially exactly the same processing, except that having done that catch, we then come down here and create a new instance of the status bean. We call set data OK and set message, passing in those values, and then we take that status bean variable and store it as an attribute on the request scope, and we call the attribute age status. Likewise, if the string parses OK, and then we work out that the age integer is not valid because it's outside of the permitted range, then we'll set the message to be something meaningful, else we'll just go ahead and calculate the premium and put it up as a request scope attribute. So there are now only one way in which this servlet will terminate, and that is the creation of a status bean object that ends up as a request scope attribute. It will always end up that way. Whether there has been an error detected or not, that status bean will be created. If there has been no error, then data OK will have the value true and the message will be null. If there has been an error, then data OK will be false and the message will be something other than the empty string. So that when we come back into the controller, the next thing we do after invoking the model servlet is then to get from the request scope the status bean. And from that bean, we can call isDataOK. If it is, we invoke the normal view, else we invoke the error view. And in this error view, it will have to get the status bean, the same status bean that the controller just looked at, and then from there it can call the getMessage method. So two ways in which we can do the validation and report any problems back to the controller. In both cases, the controller is going to have to respond to error situations by invoking an error view and respond to normal situations by invoking the normal view. Now, of course, that was just a single transaction. If you have an application in which you've got multiple transactions, then you're going to have to do that kind of thing with every single transaction. So that can start to multiply the number of classes that you have, but don't ever get put off by that, because fundamentally each one of those transactions is very simple. In comes a request, it gets passed to the model for validation and processing. The model will produce some kind of report, either with an exception or with a status bean. It might also, if the data was valid, it might also produce other data too, set that up as a bean, and then the controller will invoke either an error view to handle the error situation or a normal view to process the data produced by the model component. And every transaction will have that very simple structure. And so when you come to design your internet applications, just think about those transactions and design it on a transactional basis.